Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thanks for taking a moment to click the like button, to hit on the subscribe button, and to uh, click the bell icon if you'd like to get notifications of upcoming episodes.
So, if you're new to this show, each week Todd and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming weekend's lectionary readings from the Gospels. And our goal is to talk about those readings in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something might be said during this time as we go back and forth that would inspire you along with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
We are in the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verses 1 through 9.
That's the story of the pool of Bethesda, if I am not mistaken.
It should be. And if it's not, which we're going to cover that story with
Right, that's what
the,
we prepared
the
for.
passage. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, this is again one of those, for the fear of showing my cards too early, I'm just going to lay them all out on the table. This is one of those problematic stories again for me. I
hmm.
do not like, no, let me say it this way. I sincerely wish that the authors of the gospel stories had used greater care when they deal with the subject of people with disabilities. It seems that too often disabilities are either used pejoratively in the gospels or they're used as a metaphor to talk about some other theological debate that was
Hmm.
happening at that time.
And it carries a negative connotation. It doesn't.
Yes.
It's
Yes,
not
always.
neutral or positive. It's negative.
So, an example, not in dealing with disabilities, but like race, is when someone says, well, I'm the black sheep of the family.
Mhm.
Right. Well, what do you mean by that? Are you meaning that blackness is evil? Blackness is that, right? Right. Like we have this light and darkness in our gospel stories as well, the contrast between light and darkness. And too often, blackness has been associated with evil or something nefarious, right? And light and white and those things are purity and holiness and righteousness.
Mhm.
And for a long time, those who subscribe to really harmful theories like white supremacy have used that kind of language because blackness is used pejoratively. It's bled through into how we relate to people with different placement on the spectrum of skin color too. It's informed racism, and so we do that with disabilities. And one example is like in Matthew, where Jesus says about the Pharisee says, leave them be. It's like they are the blind leading the blind. You're like, ooh, how bad could I mean? What if I actually am a person that is living with physical blindness? I mean, why am I less than then? I mean, it communicates some type of less than
Mhm.
ism, doesn't it?
Mhm.
So that's my problem with it. That's my challenge.
Yeah.
I don't think the gospels are all bad when it comes to, you know, the subject of disabilities, but I wish that there wasn't like this ugly side to it too that we didn't have to. I just wish they would have used better care. I don't like having to wrestle with this stuff.
Well, and I want to I say this is I appreciate the fact that you bring it up to wrestle. I think unfortunately too often the Christian gospel doesn't even bat an eye. I think too often I didn't bat an eye when it came to these passages and question the the tone and and the insult that was directed, that I just bought into a narrative that was common then, and a narrative that is still too common now, which is uh, your life is you are not a full person unless you have use of all your abilities,
Right.
and so we applaud Jesus healing a person with disabilities because he's brought. We don't say this directly, but we say they've become a whole person again,
Right.
and we've looked at that much too often, and I'm guilty of it, of looking at it as well. Of course, it's a good thing that he heals, and it's a good thing because these poor people had nothing and were worthless before, and
Right.
he gave them worth and purpose and meaning that they didn't have before. So it's I appreciate this just even being brought up because this isn't even, except in small circles within Christianity, is this even being brought up.
If this is a new topic to anyone out there, I do want to recommend the book, groundbreaking book by Nancy, and forgive me, I'm not sure. The problem with learning most of your stuff through reading is that you never hear these things being pronounced.
Mhm.
But I think you pronounce her name Iceland, her last name Iceland, or Iceland, Iseland. But she wrote a book, Nancy wrote a book, The Disabled God Toward a Liberatory Theology of Disability. And it's a classic. It's worth your time reading. So some of the things that I do appreciate about the Gospels and their relationship, that's the negative. Let me share some positive. Some of the things that I'm thankful for, that I do appreciate, is that there are moments in the Gospels that I'm thinking of when the John's disciples came to Jesus and asked him, are you the one that we've been looking for, or are we waiting for someone else? And Jesus, says, go back and tell John. Um, let me quote it directly. Go back and tell John that. Oh, am I going to be able to find it? Yeah, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. So in Luke's gospel especially, Jesus' gospel is defined in itself as good news to the poor and liberation for the oppressed, and it's and how he's liberating people from their disabilities is the evidence that he is who he says he is and that his gospel is authentic. And the way that challenges me is that I grew up in a Christian church hearing the gospel preached all my life and never heard about. It never once was mentioned people living in poverty or people living with disabilities. It was all everybody sinned. Jesus died. If you accept that death in your place, you can go to heaven when you die and be assured of entrance into eternal bliss rather than some other place that you don't desire to go. So I mean, that was the gospel that I grew up with, right? Never once did that gospel doesn't even mention poverty or poor people or
Right.
people with disabilities. There's no connection to those. And so what it does is it challenges me. Am I believing am I embracing and imbibing that domesticated version of the gospel that Christianity now teaches, or have I gotten back in touch with the actual gospel Jesus himself taught in the stories? Right. And like if my gospel, and I've said this other times, one of the greatest paradigm shifting moment of awakening discoveries for me was realizing that everything that I was passionate about in my own Christian ministry, everything that I was passionate about, Jesus never mentioned. And everything that Jesus was passionate about, I never mentioned. Like
Right.
and yet I was preaching the Christian gospel, so to speak. You know what I
Right.
mean? So that's one of the things with the Gospels that I am thankful for. It pushes back against that and says, well, yeah, what is your relationship to people who are living with poverty? How does your gospel relate to poverty, and how does your gospel relate to disabilities? If it's
Mm-hmm.
not good news for those two, then you
Mm-hmm.
still have a long way to go before your gospel looks anything like Jesus's gospel.
Yeah. I mean, it just asks you to take your eyes off the sky and start looking at the actual world around you. And again, this is just antithetical to a Christianity that uh, believes that it's a belief system that um, brings you security in this life, and I mean security in the sense of you have a confidence security that you have a life beyond this,
Mm-hmm.
and and so uh, it's more important that people who are oppressed, people who are poor, people who have challenges in this life, they don't. Typical Christianity says it would, sure, that's nice to help them financially, sure, that's nice to uh, maybe be a little more inclusive, but what they really need is to believe in the gospel so that they'll be saved for eternity, because what matters is getting to the afterlife more than it is about having a life of opportunity, a life of basic human need security in this.
Mm-hmm.
That's not important in the Christian gospel. That is a nice bonus, except for the people who are in power positions within Christianity, who all happen to be doing well in the middle and upper middle class and the wealthy class. Um, they can proclaim that type of gospel and
Mm.
with without without irony at all, and say,
Yeah, the gospel can now apply to them too, right?
mm-hmm.
Where if our gospel only applies to people who are poor or people who have disabilities, then it leaves out the powerful, the privileged, and the propertied.
Yeah, the story is not for the good news of the story is not for them.
Right, right. And I think you can arrive there through Paul. You know what I mean? If all you focus on is the writings of Paul, then
Mm-hmm.
certainly you can come up with a gospel, because Paul's the same way, that never mentions the poor, people living with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go back to the synoptics of Jesus, you get confronted with that almost immediately.
Yep.
Jesus's gospel involved accessibility for people with disabilities, and it involved resource sharing with those who were living in poverty. That was the central portion of the kingdom preaching that Jesus gave. And it's not always well, what I found was that it was, I kindly say not always, let me honestly say never, a part of my gospel presentation.
Yeah. Barely
So
one. But of course, what you and I found out is when it did start to become part of our preaching, then we found our audiences dwindling,
that's true.
because the audiences we were clearly speaking to were people who belonged to the the classes and positions that didn't need the good news of the gospel.
Whether physically able or economically abled.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So then what are we to do? And that was my big question looking at this passage this week. Where does that leave us now? Because, and I see this, and I would love some pushback on this in the comments. If anybody sees it differently, I am open to seeing it differently and would love to be shown a different way of reading it, but it seems like Jesus had two different approaches with these two, where, and I'm talking about people who living with poverty and people living with disabilities. With the people living in poverty, Jesus never challenged the people living in poverty. He challenged the people in the society benefiting from a system who made them wealthy while impoverishing others, and told them, like the those in the audience of Luke 12, and those in then the rich young ruler later, um, all of your superfluous possessions, liquidate those and give those proceeds to the poor. You know what I mean? He was always challenging the other side of that equation, saying, resource sharing and wealth redistribution and mutual aid. You guys need to take care of those whose needs are not being met, right? And with people living in disabilities, it seems like and again, I'm saying it's, I would love to see it differently, but it seems like to me, it's the opposite approach. Jesus doesn't change the system or call for changes in the society. He takes away miraculously or supernaturally, he takes away the person's disability so they can now fit in to the exclusivity of the society or the culture, rather than changing the culture to be more accessible for people with disabilities. That one was, the other's. It's looking at it kind of through that lens of charity versus systemic change, where he takes away the disability so that they're no longer victims of exclusion, rather than taking away the exclusion so that everyone can be included. And while I say that, there are a few exceptions. There are times where Jesus did challenge societal exclusion, like in Luke 14, when he says, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, right? And you will be blessed, not for their benefit, for yours. You'll be blessed. And, the exclusionary practice of those in power in Mark 1, the guy who is healed of leprosy, he said, go show yourself to the priest. Don't tell anyone. Go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices Moses commanded you for cleansing as a testimony to them. And in John, even, he challenges the theology behind how those in his society thought about or treated people with disabilities, where his disciples are asking, who sinned that this guy was born blind, him or his parents? And Jesus says, nobody sinned. That's not what's going on here. No, nobody sinned that he would be, so there are times where he does challenge the societal context, but I would say to a large degree, we still see Jesus not changing the society so that people with disabilities have more access to normalcy of life that others enjoy. He's taking away the disability of the person, and that doesn't leave us with a lot of options from the Jesus story. You know what I mean? Like those exceptions I just gave you, I think do, but the lion's share of the stories with disabilities, I can't take away people's disabilities the way the supernatural healer Jesus does in the stories. You know what I mean? So the best thing that I can offer, and maybe it's dare I say that, I don't mean to offend anybody, but maybe it's a better option, that we change the society so society becomes more accessible, whether it be our faith community or our larger world communities, that we make those communities more accessible so that even if a person does have a disability, they're able to navigate those communities in a way that doesn't make them feel less than, or gives them the ability to be involved in the normal way that others are as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, those are things I wrestle with, Todd.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I'm and in the book that you referenced earlier, by Nancy Island, do you think her last name is? I don't know what it shares about where in the historical timeline we start seeing societies recognizing their responsibility to be more inclusive of disabled people. I don't know where that lands in the timeline. I know in American history,
In American history, right?
really recent, that it's even, where, there's just a couple things in the mid 20th century, and then American with Disabilities Act in the late 80s. I mean, we don't see
Yeah,
it.
that's so recent.
So recent. So so I I I'm there's part of me that's willing to let Jesus off the hook, especially Jesus, the human being who walked
Sure.
2,000 years ago, to say, out of what he had available and what culturally, I mean, if we look at the other things that Jesus preached and taught, he was teaching and preaching other things that were in the ether in that time, that he was not necessarily uh, the
He
this can
wasn't
be
pioneering new
he
ideas.
wasn't pioneering new ideas for the most part. He was taking what we would suggest is probably he's taking some of the best ideas and giving them a clear voice, and maybe adding to them. But if he's representing what's in the ether and the best of what's available to him at the time, him
This
do
wasn't there.
right. There was not inclusionary practices that he could draw from somewhere and say, let's become more like this. So the fact that in certain places he does say invite the people with disabilities is is a movement forward. It is progress
Yeah,
in
that's fair.
within within time and place. Of course, you and I, and I'm sure most who are watching, we grew up in a Christianity that says, well, we had a universal God step into the person of Jesus, and so you should expect that any wisdom, anything from divine should be able to break in, and so whatever we see Jesus do is the ultimate wisdom of God,
Right.
rather than saying, no, Jesus met people in the time and place they were at, and
It doesn't play out like that.
he himself was a product of the time and place he was. And
Yeah.
so he was a prophetic uh
He was
prophetic
progressive for his time.
absolutely. And so we honor that, and we seek to continue that spirit of progressivism with the knowledge and wisdom and insight, scientific
Yeah.
understanding of today. Um, so I'm
I
willing,
appreciate that.
yeah, I'm willing to, but we have to bring it up because of the problem of universalizing and saying what Jesus said and did 2,000 years ago
Is
gives
the
us
best
life,
possible version and what we're supposed to do today.
and we need to say no.
Do
We can
better.
do better. And if there was Jesus here in 2025, he would do better,
That's right.
because of everything that exists now.
That's right. So at the end of the day, when it comes to disabilities, the Jesus story is just complicated for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not perfect. You know what I mean? It's got some good in it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got some less than good in it. You know, it's got things that are life giving and some things that promote the things that actually continue to harm or
Mm-hmm.
prevent people who live with disabilities from living normal lives. So yeah, it's just complicated. It's Jesus' story isn't perfect on this topic by any means,
No.
um, but they're still good there. But I do want to say this too, that one of the reasons why this is so important, and this is something we all need to come to grips with, is that and my editor helped me see that this week, that all of us at some point in our life are going to encounter disability.
Absolutely.
It's a universal human reality. And whether we're experiencing disability now as a caregiver or the ones receiving that care, at some point in our life, unless we come to an end prematurely, you know, we're all going to get to those stages of life life where we begin to experience certain levels on the spectrum, certain placements
Hmm.
on the spectrum of disability. And so, what does that mean? Can we start navigating disabilities with a life giving way? One of the statements on page 13 of the book that I mentioned earlier, she writes, living with a disability is difficult. Acknowledging this difficulty is not a defeat. I have learned, but a hard won not a defeat I have learned, but a hard won accomplishment in learning to live a life that is not disabled. The difficulty for people with disabilities has two parts, really: living our ordinary but difficult lives and changing structures, beliefs, and attitudes that prevent us from living ordinarily. And I appreciate that not only is there the challenge to live an ordinary life, but also the challenge, the work that it takes to challenge those systems and beliefs and attitudes. And that's what I think we're encountering in the Jesus story. And that's why it's complicated for me. Sometimes we encounter those things in the Jesus story that are challenging those beliefs and attitudes, right? Those
Right.
systems. And then sometimes we're encountering stories that actually reinforce those beliefs and attitudes and systems. And
Hmm.
so it's just, yeah, we need to learn, we need to have wisdom to discern which parts of the stories we can tell in life-giving ways and which stories need to be adjusted so that they're told in life-giving ways. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to have for those of us with that don't have that are living lives without disabilities, and I know we all have something, but to a large degree, many of us will never experience what others are having, the struggles that others are having to live with. um it's not all the same, but we can learn, those of us with that are more able-bodied, we can learn to listen with humility to the experiences and the lives of those that are living with disabilities.
Hmm.
And when we do that, then we see our own ableism. We begin to
Hmm.
see our own uh, 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 biases through which
Hmm.
we're looking at the world. Maybe that's our disability, is the bias of ableism. I don't know.
I think that's good, and I think along with that is a sense of call to see, to with what you're saying, to that we we help people be seen for their for who they are holistically,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of bringing that, being a person who gives somebody else an ordinary life is
Mm-hmm.
is to see them in their totality. And I think, and I would go back to the biblical stories where Jesus engages with people with disability, is in that society, disabled and people with differing abilities who didn't who did not, they were pushed off to the side. They were hidden.
Mm-hmm.
They were not. It was families were ashamed of them, and religious society saw made them sinners, or their parents were sinners, in order to diminish them and to explain them away so that you didn't have to deal with the discomfort of what do you do with people with different disabilities. And I think this is to see people for who they are and in their totality. I think Jesus models that decently in what he does, even if the way he handles the situation doesn't lend itself to something that we can follow in his footsteps on. Um,
Right.
but I think seeing and recognizing and listening to and giving, again, allowing people to have voice where they're so often silenced is,
Yeah.
is the natural, is our responsibility, the abled people who are able. It's our responsibility to step aside, to give others voice, to give others uh, the the privilege of ordinary.
Yeah. 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 I agree. And one of the ways too, and what you're saying, Todd, right now sparks so many thoughts. One of the ways too, and maybe it's one of the areas in which I part ways with some of the problematic portions of the Jesus story, is it seems like we have this idealized view of what humanity should be.
Mm,
And somehow, if someone has a disability, something went wrong. You know what I mean?
mm,
Something is broken, or something
mm,
is that's the traditional ableist lens that we
mm-hmm.
look through, that
Sure.
somehow they're less than. They're not fully human. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
Right? But what if humanity just is what humanity is, right? And nature is what nature is. And it's once again showing us the rich diversity
Mm-hmm.
of humanity, of the human race,
Mm-hmm.
that not everyone's the same, not
Mm-hmm.
everything is the same, not everybody's body is the same, and we're all just as fully human as the next person, still fully bearing the image
Mm-hmm.
of God as the next person in those differences. It's
Mm-hmm.
simply a difference rather
Mm-hmm.
than um, and I'm not diminishing the real struggle that people with disabilities have in living in a world that is shaped for able-bodied people. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? But
Mm-hmm.
that's the difficulty. The difficulty, we put so many obstacles in the way of folks who have what we refer to as disabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the real challenge, is how do we remove those so that we're celebrating the diversity of the human race, rather than saying some people are fully human and other people are less than.
Mm-hmm.
Look at it more like diversity rather
Yeah.
than as a nature's oops.
Right. Yeah. No, there's the human, the the human community is a very diverse one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and
Even when people try to shut out the diversity and the equity and the inclusion,
that's right.
it's just the nature of what we're like.
That's right. And so we can choose to honor humanity however it comes into this world and
That's
however
right.
it manifests in this world, and we can honor and love and
And
seek
make
to
room for
include
it.
it and make room
Yeah.
for it, or we can or we can try to exclude and hide and shame anything that looks different than me.
Right.
And that's uh, it's a travesty if we move in a direction of only accepting a narrow window of what
Yeah.
humanity is supposed to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. No, humanity is what humanity is,
Right.
and they're fully human just as well as others are.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Anything else?
That's what I got this week, Todd.
Okay. Well, appreciate that. And
Oh, let me say this. I'm sorry we weren't here last week. I am part of the 20,000 customers in southern West Virginia who lost electricity last week during the midweek of last week. So, for those of you who are keeping track, that's why we didn't have an episode last week. Todd's back from vacation. I'm back from living without electricity. We are going to have consistent shows now going forward again. For those of you who are struggling with your faith in us, I promise you it will be restored shortly.
and we know, I mean, the tens of thousands of you who count every week. We feel your pain that we weren't here last week, but we're doing our best to be back. I'm back tonight, even though my computer's not working and I'm on my cell phone. We're back, so we're finding ways to make it work. So
That's right. We'll be here because we enjoy this and we enjoy your feedback. We enjoy your participation in this. So thanks for watching this week. For those of you who may not be familiar, Renewed Heart Ministries is a ministry that helps people navigate the intersection of their faith and whatever social justice passion they may have, how they can be a societally engaged person of faith, specifically in the family of Christianity. And all of our resources on our website are free. You can go there and check those out. Just a special shout out and thank you to all those who are supporting the work of Renewed Heart Ministries. We appreciate your support so much. And if any of you out there would like to join them in supporting Renewed Heart Ministries, you can do so by going to renewedheartministries.com and clicking donate. But whether you do that or not, please take advantage of the free resources that are there online. And Todd, anything you want to share?
Just feel free to reach out if you would like a coaching experience to help you navigate the things that you are facing currently in your life. You can find me at tjlcc.com.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate your viewership. Make sure you hit that like button for us. And if you'd like to be notified, make sure you hit the bell and the subscribe and all that stuff Todd was mentioning earlier. And other than that, we will see you next week for another thought-provoking discussion.